Hello, everyone, and welcome to Going Deeper. In this podcast, we're going to dive deeper into our current teaching series at City Church. There's only so much that we can really cover in 30-ish, depending on who's teaching, minutes on a Sunday morning. And so we thought it would be fun to come together and on a semi-regular basis and kind of wade into some waters that we weren't able to cover on Sunday, ask each other questions maybe about our messages, and then also answer some of your questions as well. My name is Rachel Sanders. I am joined by Matt Nelson, Jim Moss, and Bodie Sanders. The four of us make up our teaching team at City Church, and we are excited to jump in with you all. Today we're going deeper about all things becoming family, which is our current series right now, and kind of the overview or kind of statement for this series that we kind of put together is in an individualistic, preference-based, consumer-driven world, God calls his people to be a family, a radically different covenant community united to one another through the work of the gospel. And so I think we've reached about the halfway point in this series and covered several different topics, all with the hopes to lead us into a deeper alignment with this vision that I just read of community and what God has called us to be. And so today we're going to be answering some of your questions. We put out several AUAs, as the kids say, or Ask Us Anything polls on social media about a few of our message topics. And so we gathered that info and kind of put it together. And that's what we're going to be using to kind of dive deeper today. So let's get to it, fellas. The first kind of umbrella topic that we're going to cover is unity amid diversity. This was one of the first messages that we did in this series, and just navigating how do we come together, not in uniformity where we all look and talk and believe all exactly the same way, but how can we be united amidst diversity within our community? And so this first question, we're jumping right in deep. This first question, we had several people ask a variation of this question. And so what they would like to know is, how do you navigate this being unity amid diversity in your own family with people who disagree?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always kind of looked at these as, I know this is an interesting analogy, but as a pool of just, we get in the shallow end first, and then we begin to back up into the deep end until we're both swimming, so to speak, where it's like, okay, there's a level of trust. I think, first of all, there's got to be a level of emotional maturity for this conversation to even happen. And if you're in the room with a volatile, unemotional, unhealthy person, it's just not going to go anywhere. Yeah. And the tone is going to go up, the intensity is going to go up, and it's just, there's not going to be any positive outcome that comes of that. I always call these crucial conversations. I've had so many of these with my family over the years, and Matt is actually just incredible at these. I've learned so much from him over the years of just how he's continue to navigate these, and whereas before, I would say when we started City Church, I avoided these just because I wasn't really raised to have crucial conversations, and these conversations of what does this look like to disagree but to still live united, which is very we're very capable of doing that. We don't have to agree on everything. Matt and I don't agree on everything, and all of us sitting here don't agree on everything, and which is healthy. That's good for the body of Christ. But I think there's got to be, where we start out slow, and then we can back up into, like I said, that deep end of the pool. So,
yeah, I agree.
That's typically how kind of my framework for addressing it.
Yeah, I think having wisdom and discernment, like you were saying, understanding your audience and who it is that you're talking to, and then also just paying attention to the Spirit's leading in the right moment of, like, if I'm always preaching or standing on a platform or pointing out people's mistakes that I don't agree with, of like, then you're going to shut off the other person to be able to hear from you, hear what you have to say. And just, so I think like knowing your audience and coming in with grace and love as well.
Yeah, trying to figure out what do you hold tightly and what do you hold loosely.
Yeah.
The last couple of years, it's like everybody wants to die on every hill. You can't. And you can't engage people that way. You can't have relationship with people when every topic is the topic and you're passionate about everything. So, we talked about this on the Sunday, but to dive into it more here, being able to identify like essentials versus non-essentials, things I hold tightly and things I have to hold loosely. What are the things when I enter into a conversation that I know that somebody may see different from me, and I'm open to that, right? I'm expecting that. That's okay. That's the way we grow. That's the way we learn. And I think people walk in and they're just holding on so tightly to their opinion or this idea that it's like there can be no conversation. It's going to end badly. It's going to end in conflict or hurt feelings. And I've said this many times. I think we've been discipled by politics, that we just place everybody in categories. And so, part of it too is, walk humbly, right?
That's
listen, learn.
Yeah. And I know this is almost too practical to even bring up in a place like this or in a setting like this, but where you choose to have those conversations, I'm just thinking about a family member of mine just a few weeks ago posted something.
Go ahead and say who it is if you would.
I'm going to refuse. They'll probably know who it is if they listen to this.
Not your spouse, is it?
Definitely not my spouse.
Was her name Rachel?
I had a family member post something on Facebook that was clearly going to cause some stuff. And another family member posted a thing, and then another family member, and they were having this
Facebook battle.
And there's no health in that. Like, nobody's like, who wins in that, right? So I would say that where you choose to have conversations about your differences really matters.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the things that I was thinking about in this question is one thing that Bodie and I have done is, like, in an extended family setting, when something happens where you're like, you get that feeling in your stomach, you're like, oh, I definitely, that's not what we hold to. But it's not the setting to do that. But then when we get in the car with our circle, with our kids and our 5, we're like, did you hear what was said? Here's what we believe. Or, like, engage in that conversation to kind of zero back in with our smaller circle, when the big circle wasn't the time to have that conversation. But we want to make sure that our kids know where we stand on that, and the reason why we maybe chose to not say anything in that setting or whatever, but kind of good. Circling back in with that smaller crew.
That's good. Yeah, I grew up in a home where this just wasn't modeled well, and so I honestly didn't know how to have these conversations. And Matt was really the first one that showed me, over the last, 15 years that we've been journeying together. And so even now, I began to recognize early on when we started City Church and just prior of, like, I responded really quickly out of emotion to most things. And now it's, through that just maturing and growth of, one of the questions that I regularly ask people when we're in these conversations is, what does it look like for you to not respond out of emotion?
Yeah.
And sometimes we just need to think about what we are wanting to say before we say it. Like you're talking about the Facebook post. It's like, typically what we do is we get stirred emotionally, and then we're like, I'm going to let everybody know that. And it's like, we probably should have sat on it for a little bit or a day, and then maybe it's like, actually, I am not going to say that, or I'm going to say it completely differently. But what does that look like for you to not respond out of your emotions? I think is just so key in so many of these conversations, and unity and diversity and all that is so pivotal to health.
I was kind of wondering on this question when they're talking about family, how close are we talking about in that family? Is it, in-laws, brother? Is it spouse? Or is it older children that they're asking this question about? So, like, what would you guys say to somebody who's, like, in a marriage and there is, like, I hold this, like, to be a high bar or high value in my life, but my spouse doesn't, or vice versa, like those ends. What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, I think the level of relationship you have with somebody is going to determine,
Right.
Definitely.
how aligned that you have to be. I mean, spouses obviously should be aligned.
Exactly.
Your inner circle of friends, there should be a level of alignment with them, the people who are closest to you. This gets into a boundary conversation, which I think we're going to have at some point. But, your church, there should be, essentials that are holding you together, but you're different in a lot of ways. You may have acquaintances and friendships where it's an interest. There's not a ton of alignment. It's just you hang out together. And so, these levels of relationship determine the alignment. When I sit down with a couple who are married and, they disagree on something that's fairly foundational, it's like we have to figure out some sort of alignment here. Whether you agree to disagree, where's the common ground? And then I think you have to evaluate, again, what's the level of relationship? And then what level of alignment is possible? With my general friendships, I don't assume there's going to be alignment on everything.
Right.
I assume that we're going to see things differently and we're going to hold different opinions. And so I go into that with already that expectation.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's some markers of, am I doing this out of love, or am I doing this out of emotion or frustration? Just some key questions even before we enter into
Pride or
these
arrogancy,
yes,
honestly,
absolutely.
right?
Like
Yeah.
I've got to be right here, and everyone else needs to align with my point of view.
Yeah.
And that never goes over well. That goes out sideways.
That person's going to end up having very few genuine friendships because at the end of the day, you're going to push everybody away.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's talk boundaries then for a minute. And how does setting boundaries play into this conversation of when you're around people that you disagree with and it maybe gets volatile or whatever that looks like? What's the line of setting boundaries with unhealthy people, not just people that you disagree with?
Bodie, go ahead.
Oh, Matt, go ahead.
The thing I always tell people, and this comes from the famous book written on boundaries, is you're the gatekeeper. So you ultimately have to be in charge. And I think a lot of times we project that the problem is somebody else when we've allowed that to negatively affect us. And so, let's just say there's somebody that can't hold attention of two different viewpoints. It's their way or the highway. I realize that my level of relationship is going to go just so deep with them. My interaction with them is going to be limited because I can't be honest with you. I can't be open with you. There's not a level of trust that's built, right? So there's a boundary there because of what's possible. And again, this becomes complicated when the level of relationship increases, when it's a spouse, a family member, a close inner circle, a child. Once it becomes a lower level of relationships, I can just choose not to be around that person. I can choose to build those boundaries in. The complexities are the level of relationship. But I always tell people, man, you're the gatekeeper.
Yeah.
You choose what level of access somebody has.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people just sit around, they're getting continually battered, wondering, thinking the problem's everybody else. You're allowing them to do that, right? That's a hard reality.
Yeah, and I think it's key that, one, we don't cancel people, and I know that's not what you're saying, and that's kind of like in our culture. I don't know all the catchwords for all that because I'm old now, but it's got to be, as we're addressing this I kind of look at this as we versus I. It's like this is not just like my way of like I've got to look at it for my family of like, okay, how do I address this collectively? And what does the boundary look like for us as a family even? And, there's, Townsend and Cloud wrote a book on boundaries. Matt addressed this, but I read this when I was 21. And I don't even know how many times I've read it, but it is powerful. And if you haven't read that, that is key to having a foundation of understanding of just how to have these conversations. They've got to be agreed upon and, accepted as the group or in the relationship. And it's okay to set those. I think some of us are afraid to even set a boundary because of the pushback or, Bodie may never be my friend again. Well, it's worth leaning into that and saying, hey, I need this from you. And what would that look like for us to talk about that or to agree upon that moving forward in our relationship?
Yeah, I think the gatekeeper mindset and just paying attention to your own like emotional health and what happens when you are in a certain scenario, situation, or with a certain person. And also, like, if you are a parent, paying attention to how it's going to affect your kids. I mean, our youngest child came to our family through adoption and is a different race than we are. And so in that happening and that reality being always in our family, me paying attention to things in a way that I didn't have to before, comments that I know he might not understand now but will affect him later on. And so, like, being super protective and being a gatekeeper for him in a way until he can do that for himself. So I think that sort of line, always paying attention to that line and being okay with, like, this is a boundary that I need to set for him because I don't want him to feel any sort of certain way or whatever that may look like. But yeah.
That's good.
I would say too, like, because I totally agree with, like, you know, the gatekeeper, but also not to, like, set so many boundaries that you're not accessible to anybody, right? Because that is, we kind of are seeing our culture even shift to that. Like, if it gets too, you know, outside of my comfort zone, then I just pull away. And so there's wisdom that needs to be used in it, but also don't avoid those moments either, you know?
Yeah. And lean into what might be a tough conversation.
Yes,
sure.
Because give people a chance to, like, hey, when you say this, I don't even know if you realize what it is that you're saying, but this is how I'm receiving it. Like, do due diligence in having those tough conversations before you set any sort of hard lines, because you never know what fruit may come from that. You know?
How do you guys handle, like, people that are just, I mean, they're toxic, they're very unhealthy?
Peace.
You know, what?
I let them walk all over
Matt
me.
cancels them.
I mean, man.
No, but I think that's good to, like, I mean, a lot of people are dealing with that.
Yeah.
You know, especially in the culture and the narrative that we live in our society.
I would have, you know, in this political climate of the last few years, so many people come to me saying, hey, I have a best friend, a mom, dad, a grandpa, an uncle, brother, sister that are so politically minded or have got off into certain, I mean, it could be conspiracy theories, it can be certain things. They're like, I'm having a hard time having a conversation.
Yeah.
You know, and I'd kind of sit with them and I'd just kind of mourn the fact of, like, yeah, the level of relationship you desire with that person may not be possible right now.
Yeah.
Because if there's not alignment on some of the deepest levels, it's like, can you have a relationship? Yeah. Can you have conversations to some point?
Yeah.
But, you know, also just managing expectations of what's possible there, you know, and even mourning, like, what you wanted and what reality is. Like, you may have gone to them in the past whenever you needed something, but now that may not be the person that can speak in the deepest levels of your life because they've lost course. That's hard, you know?
And it's okay to lament that. You
Absolutely.
Know, to mourn that, and you should. And but that's where, you know, like, counselors and all the right people in our life really help us, you know, work through those things and are key.
That kind of touches on the last question for kind of this section in talking about unity amid diversity is, how can you have unity if one side views a differing belief as a pillar of their faith? So I know at City we use this language of essential and non-essential quite a bit. So how do you navigate unity when maybe something that we would consider a non-essential becomes an essential in someone else's life? And they hold that very strongly. How do you navigate that sort of
It's a
dynamic?
tough one.
It's hard. I mean, a couple years ago, I was in a room with political leaders in our state, and I watched as they just ripped each other apart there in the room and then in the news, and knew both sides really well, and just thought to myself the whole time, 95% of this you agree upon, but you're going to rip each other apart over the 5%.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that we look for what makes us different, and then instead of what unifies us. And, you know, what we talk about at City Church is the gospel is the center for us. And so what you do with the person of Jesus ultimately holds us and our community together. But then looking and saying, man, what are the places where we do have alignment? and have agreement, because we can build around that. You know, we don't have to, again, cancel or remove people because of the 5%. You know, it's also not acting like the 5% doesn't exist, but, you know, unity is possible if you have something at the center holding you together. I would also just add this. I think many people would claim that certain things are essential and they're not.
Yeah.
The essentials are few.
Yeah.
The non-essentials are many.
Yeah.
And so many people take the non-essentials, move them into the essentials category, and then wonder why they don't have unity with anybody. It's because you're never going to find somebody who completely agrees with everything that you
Right.
hold
I
dear,
was
so.
literally like, as we were reading this question, I was like, have we done a series on like the Apostles' Creed or anything? Like, we should like touch on some of these. Like, what have our church fathers throughout history said? These are the essential things when it comes to faith. Like, maybe at some point.
No, I mean,
we can
that's
kick that.
The Apostles' Creed, Nicene Creed,
Yes.
Athanasius, different.
Yeah.
I mean, different church creeds throughout history was, hey, the doctrine of the Trinity is being threatened. So we have to come back, and this is going to be a unifying statement that's going to help us move forward as the body of Christ, which is essential for us. I mean, in order to have unity, really important.
Yeah.
I think even one of the things is coming from a place of curiosity and understanding of listening.
Yeah.
You know, like really hearing the person out of, help me understand why this is a pillar of your faith. Where did you get that? Where's that been built in? Like we all pull things from multiple facets of life, and just like, you know, where did that actually show up? You know, where did you? Show me where you learned that. And so it's more of like a curiosity, and be like, no, that's not right. You're wrong. Like that conversation's not going to go anywhere.
Yes.
It's combative
Correct.
versus curious, right?
Yes.
And we should be curious.
Not judgmental.
Yeah.
Ted Lasso.
So it's so much of it is your posture.
Yes.
You know, as you come into this conversation.
Right.
And even when the emotion begins to rise, it's like, keep your posture humble, like, stay sympathetic. I mean, stay loving.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you don't have to be right. It's not worth it, because like you're probably going to lose the relationship, or it's going to diminish.
Just being willing to sit down across the table and have coffee with someone that you don't see eye to eye with, it's just so rare. Like, just people don't do that. You know, it's like, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were asking basically this question of like, why don't we hear from the voices willing to like find common ground? Like, why do we only hear, because that's what sells, and the polarized voices are the loudest. And so we only hear from the far this way and the far that way, you know, or whatever, of these big topic arguments. And so many of us are in the middle somewhere, you know, of like, we want to find common ground.
That's good. I talk to Tabby about this all the time, because she's like, why do people follow that person? And I'm like, because they're really loud. And they're really confident in their set of beliefs.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's what the next person's looking for, is like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. You know, it's like, that's what we do.
I was kind of joking about that, but if you guys remember, if you're a Ted Lasso fan, you watched the first season. The end of the first season was one of the most watched episodes of any TV show, because it so deeply resonated with people.
Yeah.
There was so much hatred going on, and then he goes into one of the most beautiful scenes in any sitcom ever made, where he's like, if you were curious and not judgmental, you would have asked me what I did growing up. I mean, he's throwing darts.
throwing the darts,
Yeah, and he's like, but you didn't. And you didn't know that I spent every Sunday afternoon with my dad in the bar. And he's like, you know, why aren't we curious? Why are we so judgmental?
Right.
Yes.
And it struck a chord with, like, everybody watching, because they're like, we're not this, but we aspire to be this.
That's good.
You know, it's like, why aren't we curious? Why don't we go and ask more questions than we do give answers? Because at the end of the day, we're insecure.
Yep. That's
Right? And we want people to see our way instead of understanding how they got to where they're at. You know?
The one of the most powerful things you can say is, I don't know.
Yeah.
And we need to do that more.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right, let's transition to kind of a different umbrella topic. We're going to talk a little bit about convenient community versus covenant community. So in this question, she asked, why is it that covenant community often doesn't seem to want to do life together outside of Sunday service? Convenient community seems to show up more consistently for just the day-to-day. How does one intentionally grow in covenant community outside of Sundays and microchurch?
I'd say there's two factors. Well, there's probably way more than that, but two that I can identify right off the bat is the Western church, the American church. We've kind of set Sunday up as the be all end all of it, right? Like it's the show. But then there's the other side of that. We don't want to do the work. Simply put, you know, it takes work for that covenant family community, that whether we don't have the time for it or our lives are just hectic, crazy, busy as I hit the microphone stand. Those would be like two of the things that I see could be like issues within it.
How would you, backing up a little bit before we dive into specifically her question, how would you define the two things? Let's define convenient community and covenant community.
Yeah, convenient community is just, I mean, that's interest-based. You know, of we play golf together or we go to the club together, whatever it may be. It's like we have like interests, and so it's convenient of, hey, you want to meet me at the volleyball courts, you know, on Riverside? And, you know, it's like, yeah, that's convenient because I enjoy that. You know, covenant is much deeper than that. It's like, hey, I'm with you no matter what. You know, I don't even have to like you to be in covenant community, but I'm for you. And I'm going to have your interest at, you know, the top of my priority list. I'm going to walk with you no matter what. And so it's so much deeper than that.
Yeah.
And that's why people don't leave a Sunday morning or wherever, if you will, and like walk into that. You know, this is kind of jumping in, but, you know, no one's ever invited me into covenant community. Ever.
Bingo.
I've had to invite every one of those relationships into my life and specifically ask them, hey, what would it look like if we began to do this? And it started out slow, you know, so.
Yeah, we have very little context for covenant
Yeah.
in our society. So when you even say that, most people are like, you know, trying to find what exactly does that mean. I mean, I tell couples when I do premarital counseling, I'm like, I'm still waiting for the couple who, you know, saws the animal in half, puts it in two pieces, and then you walk in a figure eight, you know, infinity symbol between them. Like
I would go to that wedding.
You would? Cool. I think that actually be a change of pace.
That'd be weird.
Nice.
I have a wedding on June 11th. I might recommend that.
I always
at
throw
the
it out.
ceremony.
Nobody's ever taken
Nobody's
me up
taking
on
you
it.
up.
No. But I mean,
There's a reason why.
this concept of if I don't fulfill my obligation to this covenant, make me like this animal. I mean, this is what they do in the Old Testament whenever they make agreement. And we enter into this covenant of marriage, but all other relationships in our life, we want as little as sacrifice as possible.
Yeah.
Right? So if you look at relationships, you're like, how do I sacrifice or give as little as possible? You're never going to experience this.
Yeah.
I've always said, like, you know, we want covenant so badly, we just don't want to do what's necessary to experience it.
Yeah.
And it's tested when things don't go well.
Covenant is uncomfortable.
Right.
And we crave comfort. I mean, it's just that's standard across the board. And so in order to enter into that, you're inviting discomfort and uncertainty into your life. And but that's what makes the gospel so beautiful. That's what makes the kingdom so beautiful. We must do that. We have to do that in order to be more like Jesus.
And this kind of covenant community that she's speaking to here, it also takes time.
Yes.
Like, it takes time to stick it out over the long haul. We want microwave results, and this is oven kind
Oven's
of
way
stuff.
better though, right?
Right. And so we want, I mean, the dinner with the staff, you know, line of like, we want church to become family overnight. Well, that doesn't happen. It takes time, and it takes continually showing up. It takes staying whenever somebody hurts my feelings or it makes me uncomfortable or I think I disagree with them. It's having tough conversations, and then you begin to see the fruit after all of that happens over time. That like, hey, highs, lows, mountains, valleys, they've showed up for me consistently, and I've showed up for them consistently. So I would say like it's a two-way street, definitely, of like how often are you showing up for others in your community. I do think though she does point out a reality of the church of like convenient community does tend to show up more consistently on the day-to-day. And so like, how can we bridge that gap as a church community? How can we bridge that
My only
gap?
pushback on that was what kind of a depth are you experiencing with convenient community? I mean, shallow level that I don't have to give anything or offer anything or receive anything, so it's easy to maintain, right? Covenant community is not easy to maintain, but you're going to experience a depth that otherwise you would not. And just piggybacking off what you said, it's commitment and proximity. Like, some people are just. You have proximity because you work next to them, so you have no choice.
Right.
I'm not giving anything to you, and so it seems like this relationship is easy. Covenant gets hard. Let's be honest with ourselves. This is why marriages, it's like, I'm not happy anymore. Okay, well, this was never really about that anyway.
Yeah.
We're in covenant, so we figure it out.
Talk about countercultural.
Oh, I mean,
I'm not
nobody
not
thinks
feeling
that
it.
way. Yeah.
That's my barometer. Yeah.
I addressed this earlier, but so many times we let our feelings lead.
Yeah.
And our feelings aren't always true. And so when I'm in covenant relationship, I have to recognize that and not respond out of that, because it's like they're going to say things that are hurtful. I'm going to say things that are hurtful, unknowingly, but we're still going to be friends at the end of the day, and we're still going to love each other, and we're still going to fight for the relationship.
Right.
That's what covenant is.
Yes.
It's like we're going to fight for this no matter what.
Yeah.
Because of, we want the best for each other. And
Yep.
And there's a vulnerability there too of like that kind of relationship, because obviously like there is no one that can build me up, and I feel most loved by Bodie, my husband, but there's also no one in the world that could hurt me more than he could. And so there's a trust, there's a giving, of yourself in a way that is hard and difficult.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to maintain the convenient relationships. That's why a lot of people never move into covenant, because there's so much at stake, and there's so much that I have to give, and so people just kind of stay on the outside and look in and think about what it could be or desire this, but few people experience it. The beauty of, I used to say this. My wife was like, "Stop telling couples this," but I would be like, "Marriage is like walking into a room with no doors and no windows. It's not if we work through it; it's how." I was like, and if you're not ready for that, face that reality, don't walk into the covenant of marriage. And she was like, that's so bleak. And I'm like, it's actually can be freeing. Like it's a freeing when you're like, when I'm looking at my spouse and saying, hey, you never have to wonder whether or not I'm going to be here.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
And that frees you to be who you are, to be who God's called you to be.
Right. And that's not saying that by you saying or me saying or any of us saying, hey, we're always going to be here. It's not us saying, I'm never going to make a mistake. I'm never going to mess it up. I'm never going to fall short. No, I'm going to do all those things probably. But I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
I think even on the other side, it's important to discuss, and I'd love to hear from you guys, and I'll chime in too, of just, what are the benefits, or like what are the rewards do you see out of covenant relationships that you've been in? Not just husband and wife,
Yeah,
but
I was
like,
gonna say,
with other women, with other men. Like, what have you experienced because of that?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, of just like, let's talk a little bit about covenant relationships outside of marriage, and specifically in church community. I would say Bodie and I were just having a conversation just the other day about a specific family that we have been in community with for years and years, and are still in community with today. And the best way to describe it is by using the phrases family. Like that term, we kind of all instantly know what that means, but they are not blood related to us, but 100% I would consider them blood related to us. They have been with us in highs and lows, making stupid mistakes and still standing behind us. The conversation in the documentary that we did And your sentiment, Matt, to Jim about when he said, I'm behind you, I'm with you. This family did that for us on multiple occasions of young and in leadership and making stupid mistakes, just continually standing with us like, man, we believe in you. We're here with you. We're for you. And just like them being there and saying that, it was like, you know what? We can do this. Mm-hmm. If they believe in us, if Lance and Tanya are with us, then we're going to do this thing. Like it was just, and them still being in our lives and in our family, their family. And we know that they would be there for us at the drop of a hat, and so would, and we to them, and it's just like, I think very rare, outside of your blood-related family, and just such a strong connection,
Yeah,
It's good.
Yeah, it's not to oversell this by any means, but I think when you look back on your life in hindsight, those covenant relationships are going to be the greatest joy. Yeah. It's going to be your legacy. Yeah. It's going to be, the things and the people that meant the most to you are going to be those people that you walked through highs and lows with, that you were committed to. And it honestly breaks my heart to see so many people. I think our epidemic of loneliness right now is that people are so void of covenant relationships. Yes. They just have convenient relationships, technology relationships, acquaintances, people who know just bits and pieces, but nobody that's like safe, that's like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, we're just void of those. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's why you're seeing just this increase in loneliness and despair and isolation and all the things that accompany that.
Yeah, this was, goodness, I don't know, maybe 2010 that I reached out to another guy that he served in the same position that I did, and I just was like, hey, what would it look like if we began to meet? And so, there it was a convenience of like we served in the same role, we have kind of the same responsibilities, but it, over the last 13 years, that relationship is, I've never been that close with another male human on the planet. Like, it's just like, I didn't know I could get that close to somebody else, to be honest. And, but it is, I know no matter what I do, no matter how far I may fall into sin, like, he's got my back. Yeah. And he's going to still stand with me no matter what. Mm-hmm. And I think that is covenant at the deepest level of no matter what you do. I tell my boys this every night. No matter what you do, no matter what you say, no matter where you go, you are always welcome home. Home is safe. Mm-hmm. And that's the approach we have to take with covenant relationship of no matter what you do, no matter where you go, no matter what you say, I'm still your friend.
We were talking
about
this.
And I still am going to fight for you.
We were talking about this yesterday. Jim and I were about the dynamic of David and Jonathan in Scripture. Mm-hmm. And thinking of like how many people were coming against David. You talk about your head on a swivel. Everybody wants you dead. Everybody, it's a warrior culture of who's in control and everybody wanting to take you out. And David knowing at the end of the day, Jonathan, I don't have to worry about him. Mm-hmm. Like, he's going to do what's best for me. Mm-hmm. And he's going to have, even when Jonathan had no reason to. When Saul loves David more than his own son, and yet that doesn't turn to bitterness with Jonathan, he actually is like, oh, I'm going to covenant with you, and I would lay my life down for you. Have people in your life that you're like, okay, at the end of the day, I know that I'm going to get attacked. I know that I have people coming against me, but I have a refuge. Mm-hmm. Like, I have a safe place. The beauty of that. Incredible, right? We all want that. Mm-hmm. We all need that.
How do you guys, how do you invite somebody into that? What does that look like? I know that people are curious of that, of like, well, where does that relationship even begin? What does that look like? What do I even say? What do I ask?
Yeah. I think you're segueing into this last part about vulnerability. Because I do think that it takes that. It takes somebody, laying that path of going first.
Yep.
Yeah, I think just being willing to make the ask. I know that Bodie and I, in our closest couple relationship, we went years without having friends, which makes us sound really pathetic, but that is just the truth.
we had a lot of convenient community and acquaintances, but nobody that knew us on the deepest of levels.
Right.
It was like we lead everybody that
Which
we're,
is like it's a pastoral thing too.
Yeah.
But like when we met this couple and we went like to dinner with them, we just had like one dinner with them, and we like knew when we left, we're like, okay, I think like we really both liked them. You know, it's like one of those. And we were just awkward the next time we got together, and it was like,
It's like
so
a
we're
first
just
date.
gonna
Ask them
like,
out.
yeah. We just were like, so we're just gonna, we really like you guys. And we could see us like going on vacations together. We would like to like when our kids are older, when they're gone, that we're still like, I mean, we just went all the way in. We're like made the big ask of like, we'd like to be old friends, you know, like, and we had just had one dinner together, and luckily they felt the same way. And I was like, yes, let's do this. I'm not saying it always works that way, but we just went in. It was just like, just made the awkward ask, and it has served us very well. They are our best friends, you know, now.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I think this is something you definitely hold before the Lord as well.
Yeah.
And I know you guys did, but that's a key piece of this, of, you know, have you held this before the Lord and asked for his wisdom and knowledge and insight of who these people are? Because we can choose poorly too, and it can go really bad, you know. And I don't say that to cause fear, but it's just a reality of like, we need to go slow. I mean, I know you guys went all in, but it's like, it's key to like, okay, let's bathe this in prayer.
Right.
Let's make sure that this is what God is wanting here, you know, for me specifically.
And most of the time, as we've already said, I feel like covenant community, it happens over time. And so like maybe somebody that you were put in a microchurch, you know, with over time develops into like, you know, you turn around and you're like, oh man, we've been walking together now for a few years. And it started out, we didn't even know each other, you know, and now we've gone through these milestones together. That is, I would imagine, most typically how it happens is just, you know, over time.
Yeah.
And sticking it out. So let's, all of this, all that we're talking about right now takes vulnerability. And so that's kind of the last topic that we're going to dive into. I know Matt last Sunday was the message on vulnerability. I think maybe you still have a vulnerability hangover possibly from this.
I do.
But you mentioned in your message before you begin to share some of your story.
Quote drop.
Well, not really a quote drop, but kind of.
A phrase.
Yes.
Phrase drop.
I'm going to be appropriately vulnerable with you today. And so could you, and not just you, but you can start us off, kind of break down a little bit more of what appropriate vulnerability looks like.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of hold these two tensions together. I think both of them are true, is that I can't share everything with everyone, but I have to share everything with someone.
Yes, good.
And I just think we have to figure out how to play that out in ways that I don't walk into a relationship and tell you everything about me, because I don't know you. I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know what you're going to do with that information, right? And so that's wisdom. And so sometimes we want to be so authentic and vulnerable. We're just like, let me tell you all of my trauma. That person can't handle it, right? They're not going to be a good steward of it. But then, you know, once we talked about this, you don't microwave these relationships after time and after a level of trust is, then I feel like the Holy Spirit always leads us to say, hey, I want you to open up more. I want you to become more vulnerable, right? Obviously on a stage in a setting like this, when you're preaching, I'm going to give people the information that I feel like they can handle and that they need to know. I'm also going to try to be sensitive to the leading of the Holy Spirit in my own life, which was my message on Sunday. Was not one I wanted to preach, but I felt like it was an act of obedience. And even navigating your relationships like that, saying, okay, you know, in order for this to go farther and deeper, I have to give more, right? This is the thing, people, your weaknesses and your vulnerability is like Velcro, and they can attach themselves to it. Like your strengths and weaknesses, sometimes people are like, man, I don't know what to do with that because you're just awesome, you know? But your weaknesses, everybody can identify with that. And so I think sometimes we, you know, in relationships, we want to lead out of our strengths, but sometimes if you just lead out of your weakness, open that door, then people are like, okay, this is a safe place, right? Everybody's looking for that safe place to be honest about their brokenness, because everybody has brokenness. Everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've always kind of looked at these as layers or rings. We're talking about the convenient, community, which, to me is more of like we have interest-based relationships, and then, covenant, there's kind of two tiers for me. And you even see Jesus modeling this. Of first, he was a carpenter, and then, he invited these disciples to come and follow him. And so there was a level of intentionality of like, hey, we're going to circle up together, and that's community. That was covenant community. But he even did something even more to that, is he invited Peter, James, and John away to have these prayer sessions. And it's almost like this inner circle, that you see happening. And so I've always looked at it kind of like that, of like, okay, who's my inner circle? Who's my community? And, who's my convenient community? And so like, that's where, there's an appropriate level of vulnerability with my community, my covenant community, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to tell them everything, but I'm going to share way more with them than I would with my convenient community. Yeah. And then my inner circle community, my inner circle covenant relationships, like it's all in.
Yeah.
Like I'm completely, naked, so to speak. I don't want to use that word, but it's like there's nothing hidden.
Right.
I'm going to share with them everything, because we've journeyed together for quite some time, mm-hmm. and I know like that level of trust is there, that level of vulnerability is there, and so it's kind of like, what are those layers, and like looking at like that appropriate, is this a group setting? So it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to share everything here, mm-hmm. but with my inner circle, absolutely, I have to. There's healing in that, and freedom in that. So
yeah, I think in doing the work too, and looking at your life and your relationships, and making sure that, or identifying those rings in your life, identifying that like, who are these people in my life that I can share this with, and then ultimately, I think for a lot of people, like, who are the people that know everything, and making sure that you have identified those people, and that like that you have a few people in your life that you're laid bare before, that know all of the cobwebs and all of the things, because that's really important. And I also think too, in thinking about how to get to that place, if you're like, man, my community that I can be really vulnerable with is really small or non-existent, of like, what are the steps to take to get to that place? And like, what I would say is like, let them prove themselves trustworthy with what you can give them at first, and then it kind of, you grow into it, mm-hmm. like you're not just bearing your soul day one, but you can share and see how they handle your vulnerability, how they steward your story, if you will, and like carry that, and then you kind of grow into deeper levels of like vulnerability and community, together with that person.
I know we're kind of bouncing back and forth now between that community and vulnerability piece. But when we talk about like that inner circle of people that I can be completely vulnerable with, is there like a number on that? We would probably all agree that's not a big group, right? Like that's a
small
that's
group.
a small group.
I think you look at what Jesus did, is he pulled away with 3 people. And so I've always, looked at it as a circle of myself is in the center of that. And though there's arrows, going in and out of that circle, but there's, from the top is God or Jesus, like, pouring into me. And then, it's like these side to side relationships. It's like 3 max is all, that's how I've looked at it.
Okay. Yeah.
And I don't know if, I'm saying like that's the model, but it's like, that's kind of like how I've always looked at it. But yeah. It's been helpful to me to like see like, okay, what does this look like? So, because it's that inner circle, it needs to be small, like you were talking about, Rachel.
Yeah, absolutely.
That doesn't need to be 15 people.
No,
it shouldn't be. That's what community. That's what covenant community looks like. Inner circle is like, hey, there's at least one other person, but no more. I would say no more than I don't know.
Yeah. So even looking at
don't have 10.
Looking at a church like ours, we're not massive, but we have a fairly large congregation, a fairly large group of people that attend City Church. You're not going to be able to be in the deepest of covenant relationships with everybody that we attend church with. So it's taking that convenient community, letting that then smush down and smush it, until you've got like this spot of a handful that
Like
it's
taking the church and making it a micro church.
micro church.
Good
I was
plug.
hoping somebody would
Nice.
pick up on that.
And on June 4th, no, just kidding.
Yeah.
You guys will be finding about microchurch invites
Yes,
soon.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of alluded this to staff the other day, but 17 years full-time ministry. I've never had so many calls, text messages, direct messages, Facebook messages than I did this week from people who, inside and outside of our church, who, because of the message that I preached, felt like I can be vulnerable, right? And so what it said to me is, obviously everybody's walking through their own brokenness, whether you know it or not. And then how just desperate people are for safe places. And I had a church planner call me just crying uncontrollably kind of at the very end, saying, I was in my car, I watched the video of your message, and I just have to tell you where I'm at right now because it's really, really bad. And, I think that sometimes crisis makes us get to the place of vulnerability,
Yep.
which, sometimes that's maybe the only way we get there. Yeah. But then some people who are listening to this, I'm saying it doesn't have to be just crisis. Yeah.
Don't wait.
Don't wait, because the beauty of life is places where you're fully known and fully loved. And if you're like, where do I start? I'm not just being overly spiritual, but you start in prayer. Like, God, show me where. And then commitment and proximity, going back to this, you have to show up and you have to be committed, right? Because you have to develop relationships that have the chance to bloom and blossom into something more than that. So, it sounds stupid, but I tell my kids, you're never going to meet the right people in the wrong places. The right people hang out in the right places, and you have to show up there consistently. And you do that, and the door is opened. Yeah. And I just want to encourage people listening, because, Brene Brown really made this famous with some of her books and TED Talk. But, vulnerability is at the core of like our shame and like what if people know, and it's also at the core of our freedom. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Yeah. If I tell this, what could happen to it? But if I don't, what will happen to me?
Yeah.
Right? And it's like eventually just saying, I have to be known in order to be free.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
And so it's worth it. The risk is worth it. And I'm going to do what I need to do to step into that.
I would just add this to these covenant relationships is the cadence has to be high. I would like, we got to have weekly conversations. Yeah. Even with the covenant community, it's like, man, we better be circling up multiple times a month. It's like, because as we're more distant, that relationship is going to break down. And so that's another level of the commitment of, hey, I have to do this. I've got to do it frequently in order to maintain that relationship. It's key. Yeah.
I think we knew this before, but it's Sunday, just a testimony, an example of vulnerability begetting vulnerability, of just like someone leading the way and being willing to be appropriately vulnerable, from a stage and a platform with a title, with, all the things, that is willing to be vulnerable, is contagious. Like most people need someone to lead the way. And so just being willing to do that, and willing to step out and to share the pieces of your story, knowing who you're with and being appropriate in all of that, but like being willing to be, vulnerable in whatever setting that you're in is really powerful and really goes a long way in that. So on the other side of that, how do you stay, one of the other questions we got was, how do you stay vigilant after being vulnerable when what you have shared has been used against you? Has that ever happened to you? And how do you handle that?
That's a tough one.
Yeah. I think we have to be realistic about the risks of relationships. You said this earlier, Bodie has more information about you that could be used good and bad, and how many know even as your spouse who you love more than anything, you don't always get it right.
Yeah.
I do feel like people walk into right now our relationships almost like this with perfectionism, like I'm waiting for you to mess up so I can just confirm, like,
Yeah.
The church is horrible, and you can't, you know that at some point people are going to let you down. But I think wisdom tells us that I'm going to be appropriately vulnerable after trust is built, right? And so that's the key. It's like, have I ever had somebody take the deepest part of me and use it against me? No, because I've been really wise with who I tell that. Have I had people hurt me? Absolutely, because that's relationships. And if you're going to enter into that space and wade into that water, you're going to have to navigate that, right? And it's about our expectations. And right now, people, especially young people, walking into the church with expectations of, like, the church is going to be perfection and relationship. And no, never.
No.
It's fairy tale.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? Which I think the enemy uses right now in incredible ways to be like, I told you. I told you that everybody was fake. I told you they were going to let you down. No. You're sinful and fallen, so am I. And if we journey together long enough, I'm going to let you down. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We tell people at church all the time, we tell people there's a honeymoon period where you're going to think we're perfect until you find out we're not.
Right.
And then you're going to have to figure out what to do with that.
Yeah.
Just going to go to the next church. It's cool.
Well, and we joke about it, but that's what the cycle most people.
And
it's not just church; it's relationship. I just bounce from relationship to relationship because I've never learned how to go past the surface.
Right. It's hard to know. The question is, kind of broad. I don't know what depth that is, too.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think I totally agree. I think did you wade into the waters of confronting that person? Of, like, how deep was it? Was it intentional or unintentional? Like one of those. Were you able to do that? That would be the first thing that I would say, dependent on the level with which it was. But being willing to step in and work through something of, like, I didn't want that to be shared. I don't know if you knew that, but that hurt me when that was, like, little side joke comment about whatever. I think those types of situations, we don't like it. It's messy. It's uncomfortable. And most people avoid it and move on. And so you don't get the fruit on the other side of working through that. And for them to be like, I never thought of it that way. Yeah. The hope would be that would work out.
Yeah, and when you don't do that, that's when that root of bitterness, can take hold in your heart, right? Which then that calloused, hardened heart, I won't share.
Right.
Going all the way back to the very beginning, like having those crucial, critical conversations about things like that.
Yeah, I had I was at the school, our son's school the other day, and I shared something with another man here in the church. And when I was driving home, I realized that I had overshared. And I just called him, and I said, hey, bud, I shared some things with you that I shouldn't have. And I said, I need you to keep that between you and I. Like, don't even tell your wife.
Yeah.
And we just had that conversation. And I think those are important that, I've always referenced Matt on this because, like, he truly has taught me how to do this so well. But it's just, I wouldn't have done that 10 years ago. I wouldn't have done that 14 years ago. But now I'm like, yeah, we have to do that. We have to have those conversations. We have to have those boundaries and guidelines that we just say, you know what, I'm going to go for it. And it's okay.
Yeah.
So.
I was coaching a church planting couple yesterday, and they brought up a conflict that's happened, and immediately they were like, it's really not that big a deal. We don't really think it's something that, they meant to do. They're a core part of our team. I think it's just something we need to move on from. And I was just like, no. I was like, if they're core, if they're inner circle, you figure out how to communicate through conflict. You cross that bridge. You tell yourself, like, we are going to be people who deal with little things so they don't grow into big things. Right. We've tried to establish that culture with our staff and our church here of, like, whatever's dealt with, because, man, it just leads to freedom.
Yeah.
Where you're not carrying this, where that little bitty root is not growing, and we know it grows fast.
Yeah.
So,
I just had a conversation with somebody not that long ago, and it was one of those situations where they had something, but it was wasn't big enough at the time, and like, well, we'll just let it go. Well, then we come into another situation that should have been very small and not that big of a deal, but because both parties were building on a foundation of something that happened a year ago, that it was like, oh, you see, y'all came into that room with something completely different than I did, and so that made that such a it made it loaded in a way that it didn't need to be. It's because that wasn't dealt with, that long ago.
Some people have church hurt, which obviously you're going to address here in a message coming up really soon. And I think even with the vulnerability piece and like relationships, if you're coming in expecting people to let you down, you're going to sabotage the relationship before they start, which happens so often. And just with this mentality of, man, I'm not going to do that. So
let's talk about the response to vulnerability. You're not necessarily the one being vulnerable in this moment, but let's talk a little bit about how to respond to vulnerability, how to engage with, respond, follow up. What if you don't know what to say? Some of those type of things. How do you respond to people being vulnerable to you in your life?
Yeah, we talked about this not that long ago, but oftentimes people aren't looking for answers. They're looking for somebody to listen. And that's one of the things that we've established in our marriage. Like, am I listening or are we fixing? Oftentimes we just need somebody to listen. That's because
I got it wrong a lot of times.
I'm the more emotional one of the two of us. Rachel's much more of a robot. I love you. Well, you're not. You're not.
Extreme.
That was extreme.
I tend to run high on emotion. I should say that.
Yes,
That's better. You can be more even.
Her soul is void.
Soul is void.
Have you guys?
We need counseling. No,
have you
guys
ever seen the nail in your head video? We could link this one. It's so good.
Oh, gosh.
The woman has a nail literally sticking out of her head, and the husband's like, "You have a nail in your head." And he's like, "I just want to take it out." She's like, "I just want you to listen to me."
Yes. Right. Yeah. No, we have had a lot of that. Of like, my brain goes into fix mode. Like, when something's being shared, I am like formulating the 3-step plan of how to get out of said thing that is happening. And so that doesn't go over well when someone just wants to be vulnerable and share. So it's definitely has helped of like, am I fixing or am I just, listening?
Yeah. Listening, empathizing. I used to put a ton of pressure on myself as a young pastor to try to come up with the right things to say when you're sitting in a hospital or someone confesses something or someone does something. And honestly, I put zero pressure on myself now. I really do mean that because they just need presence, right? They just need your empathy. And I've realized one of the most powerful things to say to people is look at them and be like, that sucks.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry. That happened to you, and I'm so sorry that you're walking through that. Yeah. Period.
Full stop.
Yeah. Instead of doing what you do, which is what I want to do.
Right.
Which is let me give you the 7-piece plan to rebuild.
Yes.
And get back on your feet.
So, right.
Yeah.
I think one of the helpful things too is just asking questions to get them to think deeper about it. Are you bitter or resentful? Are you harboring unforgiveness, as you enter into this or, trying to work through this? What does that look like for you as an individual? What are you holding that, maybe the Lord needs to do some work on you before you actually enter into this relationship?
Yeah. I think what you said too earlier about the power of, I don't know.
Yeah.
And being willing to say that you don't know, because life is messy and not always black and white and very nuanced. And so to go in like everything is just the ultimate level of pride, and to sit there and think that I'm going to know every answer to what you're saying and speak to the emotion of it more than anything. I think it's disarming. I think when you're just like, man, I don't know, but I'm willing to sit with you in it. Let's figure it out together. Or I think there's so much power in that too. I think people can avoid spaces to where people are going to be very vulnerable because I'm not going to know what to say. I have never lost someone that close to me before. I've
Right.
never, like it can feel like a lot of weight on the other side of that because you feel like this pressure to do something.
Yeah.
When so often it's just nearness.
Yeah.
That's
And-
good.
Oh, you're sitting with someone in tragedy, and this has caused me to question my relationship with God.
Yeah.
In that moment, they're not asking you to give them the theological basis
Yeah.
for why God exists.
Why God
Yes,
actually
100%.
exists.
They
Yeah.
just need your presence,
Yeah.
and they need your empathy, right? And so it's honestly just recognizing what people are actually asking for. They're not asking to be fixed.
Yeah.
They're not asking for answers in that moment. Maybe that comes down the road. They're asking for you to sympathize and empathize with where I'm at in this reality,
Yeah, one of the worst things that we can do, and I've done this so many times, of just, hey, let me tell you what you need to do.
Yeah.
It's like, don't say that.
Yeah.
Just delete that.
I know. Yes.
It's like that's not it.
If I were you, I would.
Yeah.
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 That's good. Good, guys. This was fun. Let's do it again sometime.
You guys doing
Let's-
next week?
Yeah.
Next week?
Buddy, what was your signature sin again? You were telling me earlier.
My what?
Signature sin.
So, yes.
Be vulnerable.
Next
with
week
us.
on Going Deeper.
Pastor Bodie reveals.
Appropriately.
Signature sin.
Yeah.
Make sure
That's
you
a good
tune in.
clickbait.
All inappropriate.
Let's pray over our people real quick as we end and some of the things that we talked about and this kind of
Before we pray, I think it would be fun to practice appropriate vulnerability by what's the thing that you want nobody to know, like your guilty pleasure food.
Oh.
That you're just like, man, I don't care if it's like 2 Big Macs with a fry.
2 Big
I mean,
Macs.
like
Holy
whatever
cow.
it is, that you're just like, this is
That would put me in the hospital.
yeah. Like the Great Wall of
Um,
Chocolate from PF
When
Chang's.
I'm driving, I stop and get used to get a Diet Mountain Dew. Now I get sugar-free or zero, whatever. I don't even know what it's called, but it's like the zero sugar Mountain Dew. And I get the sharing size bag of peanut M&Ms every time I'm on a road trip. Guilty pleasure, both
There
of
you
them.
go.
Buddy.
I am notorious for waking up or not going to bed till late and having a giant plate of nachos.
we call this in our house the fourth meal.
Yes.
Bodie has a fourth
Wow.
meal
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At what time?
Oh, it could be midnight. It could
Midnight.
be 2
Holy
a.m.
smokes.
If I wake up at 2 a.m. and I'm like, I want some nachos, I will go get the kitchen started. And
How do you sleep?
Nachos activated.
I don't sleep much.
Rachel?
Man, I honestly don't know.
Thank you for being so open. And
Yeah.
I know. I mean, I drink a huge iced coffee every day.
Yeah.
And it's not like a healthy
Wah,
one. It's
wah,
a very.
wah.
We had
I literally
we had
don't know
a
what-
literal debate just 2 days ago. She likes this certain kind of
Creamer.
Hatch green chili
Oh.
salsa. And she also likes the creamer that she uses. And she's like, if I had to let one of these go, which one do you think it would be? I mean, so they're both very prominent in her
They're
life.
strongholds, but
Yes.
they're not like, I wouldn't call them like guilty pleasures per se.
The Lord's got the devil's got his foot in the door, but it's not quite a stronghold.
Yeah.
Come on now.
What's yours, Matthew?
I shared this the other day on stage, so it's a little bit anticlimactic. But when I go to Wingstop, I'll do like 15, 16 wings with like the large seasoned fries and large Coke, and that's kind of my thing. Like I feel like I could eat endless amount of chicken wings. So, there you go.
Nice.
All right, feel free to pray.
Okay, now let's pray. I'll dive in. I'll pray over us today. Lord, we love you. God, we just thank you for this series that we're in right now. This call that you have placed before us, this picture that you have placed before us of what it looks like for church to become family, for us to engage with one another in a way that leads us into becoming people of love, in a community of love, people that hold one another, that carry one another through the highs and the lows of life. And I pray, Lord, that as you have already begun to do in this series, and I know will continue to do in the rest of this series, God, would you bring us ever so closer to this vision that you have placed before us? of your bride, your church, giving a picture to the world of really what you look like.
Yeah.
And that is our hope and that is our desire. And I pray that wherever everyone is that is listening or watching this, God, that you would meet them in our humble words, that you would take it farther than we ever could.
Yeah.
And we give you all the praise and the glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen.